Hi, I'm Jen Wolfe, Managing Partner at Untitled Capital. I'm in Brooklyn today with Shreya Murthy, CEO of one of our portfolio companies, Partiful. We invested in Partiful back in March 2020, before they even launched the product. Today, over 1 million people use the free app and website to customize event pages and gather RSVPs for social gatherings all over the world. Hi Shreya, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So there are a lot of apps to help plan parties, but your mission is really what stood out to me when we invested from the beginning. Tell us who Partiful is for.
Yeah, the reason that I started Partiful was that after college into my mid-20s, and I had found that it was a lot harder for me to meet new people and make new friends. And what I noticed amongst my peers was that in general, as people were getting older, friend groups had started shrinking naturally. Like people moved away, and we didn't have the same contexts that we did in college to keep building those social circles over time. And what I found for myself was that the most effective way to do that was through parties and other social events where you could meet people in a very casual, low-stakes group setting, and the people you were meeting were friends of friends. So they were the people you were most likely to hit it off with, and because you had mutual connections, you were likely to have an opportunity to see each other again. And so I wanted to make that process of planning events, meeting people at those events, and building relationships with the people you met at events a lot easier. And so at the end of the day, Partiful is for anyone who wants to do any of those things, whether you're the person that's trying to gather a group of people and have it not be stressful and avoid a chaotic group chat, or a platform that no one checks, or emails that get lost in a junk folder or a spam folder. And then if you're someone attending these events, Partiful makes it really easy to keep track of who you're meeting and put faces to names and have really easy opportunities to get to know those people better, invite them to something you're hosting, invite them to something you're attending, and build that relationship in a way that doesn't feel forced or try hard, but is just part of the way that we naturally get to know people over time.
So you were at Palantir before you did this. What made you decide to jump to sort of the consumer side of things? And really, how did you come up with the idea for Partiful itself?
Early in my career, in some ways, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, or honestly, even what tech was. I didn't come from a background of having spent a lot of time in the tech world. I didn't grow up or go to school in Silicon Valley, and so I got recruited to Palantir at the age of 23, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. Ended up spending a few years there working in the private sector business, and what I discovered through that process of building products for hospitals and manufacturing organizations and logistics teams was that I really enjoyed building something that made someone's life easier. So in the context of working with a hospital worker, it was, they have so much stress that they're dealing with. How do you create something that saves them time and makes them feel less stressed at the end of the day? And I got a lot of fulfillment out of doing that, both Palantir and then the place that I worked after, which was an AI startup focused on building enterprise AI tools. They were really, at the end of the day, focused on making corporations more efficient. Yeah. And that wasn't the thing that got me out of bed in the morning. So I started thinking about what are the ways that I can solve real problems in people's lives, save them time, save them stress, make them happier, maybe put a smile on their face, but do that in a way where the end mission was actually just about that person that I was building the tool for, and where, that was the person that I had to be accountable towards, and everything I could do would be about how do I improve their lives. And so that's what led me to focus on these consumer problems where, the user is the person that you're trying to solve all of the problems for, instead of building a tool that this person's going to use, but actually the goal is what this corporation is going to do with it.
Yeah. We met in person right before the pandemic.
I think I was your last pitch.
Yes, you were my last pitch in person. And I remember there was a cleaning crew waiting for us after we had the meeting, and they just started lysoling the wall down, and we were like, that's a little strange, what does that mean? after that, sort of the world will turn upside down a little bit, and it would be a strange time also for in-person events. But I guess, despite all that, it was still really a no-brainer to invest in you guys and, to lead that very first round.
What was so interesting to me was the dichotomy between everything crazy that started happening in the world at that time and how it felt like inside our little Partiful bubble. Because, we went out to raise funding in February 2020, closed the round at the beginning of March. And, I remember thinking like, oh, I'm really glad that I'm done with all my pitches at this point. And I had friends being like, hey, are you crazy? You better be like, taking the money and running because, no one's going to want to, invest in you in 2 weeks from now. And as the rest of March went on, I remember feeling like, okay, this is getting really, really crazy. At that point, I don't think anyone knew just how long it would last. And while, there was a part of me that was obviously freaking out a little bit and certainly worried, not just about the company, but frankly, just the state of the world and the people around us. But inside the little bubble of Partiful, like, you guys were really chill about it. I think we, for the most part, were pretty chill about it in the sense that we all kind of knew this isn't how it's going to be for the rest of our lives. Like, at some point, this is going to be over. And when it is, people are going to want to gather again. People are going to feel a very strong need to socialize, and it might actually end up being a really good time for us if we can just survive this period. And so then the process just became, well, how do we survive this period? And it ended up being trying to survive for like close to 2 years. But that process, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that process ended up being, I think, a lot better than it could have been if we were working with someone other than Initialized.
In hindsight, it was like, that went on for a long time, but I remember at the time it was like, well, we just have to survive, a couple months. A couple more weeks, and then it'll be fine. So it's funny to look at it, from far in the future after it's over. Talking about the pandemic, and we're used to thinking about things long term. We're investing in early stage, but what do you think was the main challenge that the pandemic raised for you when things started shutting down? Yeah,
well, I think first and foremost, there was just the stress about the world. Like, when something like a global pandemic happens, it almost makes everything else feel a little irrelevant. Like, what am I doing? Like, obviously, I had poured my heart and soul into building the early version of the company, finding my incredible co-founder Joy, getting funding. But then no matter how big your personal life seems or the things that you're working on, you sort of take a step back in those moments and just think about everything that's going on in the world and how much bigger that is than you. So there were certainly, that was a lot of the feeling at first. But then I thought about what can we do that's actually going to bring some joy back into the world? And we're not able to do that right now, but as long as we believe that this will end at some point, we can make sure that we have the product that is right for when we can socialize again. And the thing that made it hard for the survival period was, one, just not knowing, like not knowing how long we had to make our runway last, not knowing when this was going to be over. And then also just from a product perspective, not being able to test the product with real users, because we weren't going to be promoting parties during a pandemic, which was the right thing to do ethically. But it did mean, like, it's really hard to build a product in a vacuum. You don't know what's right and wrong and what assumptions you've made that are true and untrue until you actually get a product into users' hands in as authentic of a setting as possible. And so we found really like small ways to test little bits of what we were doing. Like, we found groups of people who had been, isolating and were testing 3 times a week, and were, gathering outdoors masked if everyone had gotten a negative test result. So there were these little pockets where we were learning bits and pieces. But so much of the early versions of the product were just taking leaps of faith. There was frankly a lot of groping around in the dark and making some really bad decisions and building stuff that we, ultimately did have to throw away. But we survived, and we got it to a point where once the world opened back up, we had something that was pretty good to start building off of.
Yeah. And I know during that time, you had a lot of people encouraging you to pivot or do a different idea. What helped you stick to your original thesis or vision for the company?
Yeah, so it's funny. I feel like I would constantly switch between feeling gaslit in the sense of everyone around me, except you guys, was telling us that we should pivot or that at least we should focus on virtual events. And we were like, okay, but virtual events are really lame. Like we don't enjoy going to them. Like I'll go to Zoom parties if it's like a milestone event and I want to be there for a friend or something, but I'm not like, yeah, it's a Friday night Zoom party, let's go. And so there was this dissonance where I knew I didn't want to build something that I wasn't personally excited about. And then in the backdrop of that, all of these virtual events companies were raising millions and millions. They were seeing so much traction, so much growth, and we were obviously seeing none of that. And so there would be times where I would be like, am I crazy for not doing this? But just instinctively, it didn't feel right. And then on the flip side, there would be so many times where I was like, no, all of you are crazy. Like, I'm not crazy. Jen's not crazy. Like, how is it not obvious to everyone that humans are hardwired to socialize in person, and you can't undo whatever it is, like 30,000 years of human existence with 2 years of this terrible, terrible thing. No matter how terrible that is, that's not going to undo these things that have in many ways made us human and defined us as humans. And so I always just felt so much faith that underlying human need was always going to persevere over any of these like temporary changes in how we had to operate.
Yeah, I do remember we talked about it once where we were like, should we look at some of these other like slightly adjacent, areas? And I remember I said in the end, like, if you really, what you really cared about, like what I remember from the pitch was like, if you really cared about loneliness, you guys should stick with that idea. I think that was the exact thought you were having as well. And it was good to have someone else just sort of say that part out loud.
Yeah, exactly.
And not just be like, oh, am I the only person, who thinks this? Like, everyone, I'm hearing a lot of like opinions to like look other places. So I remember that very clearly because it was just like, oh, we both sort of had that moment where we're like, yeah, that's right. We should do that.
I also remember just people be like, yeah, are your investors freaking out? And I was like, no, they're actually being like very chill about it. Like there was no question, even though it was March 2020, that they were, going to wire the funds they said they were going to wire. And then no matter how tumultuous things got, it was like, are you guys having fun? Are you guys like enjoying what you're doing?
Yeah.
Because if you are like this, you'll figure it out. But don't try to build if your heart's not in it.
Yeah. No, it's funny that you say that because at no point were we like, how do we get our money back? We were like, oh, well, I guess this is just startup stuff. It's a very like large scale startup stuff thing to happen, but it's just that's what early stage is about. So just preserve runway.
Yeah, exactly.
And continue to build great product. So let's get into the product. Can you explain like exactly how it works and what are the unique features of it? And since we first met, it was more of a text messaging platform, and now today, obviously, it has some text messaging, but it does all these other amazing things.
Yeah, sure. So when you think about what is stressful about planning a gathering with a group of people, there's really a few pieces to it. There's figuring out who's coming, when people are free, where we're meeting up, and all of the coordination and back and forth that's required with every single person in that group. And the problem with having to coordinate a large group of people is that most communication platforms that we have aren't really designed to make that easy. I think everyone's experienced a chaotic group chat where it's really noisy and someone said something really important, but you have to scroll back up to find where it was and what they said. And then also when you're planning a gathering, there's usually like a few people who are trying to centralize a lot of the decision making. And so one of the other problems with like using something like chat for something like this is that there's no sort of hierarchy of like, okay, some people are the organizers and they're trying to coordinate a bunch of stuff, and everyone else here is, you know, your voice will be heard, but you know, you probably don't even want to take the reins if you're a guest. And so a lot of the ways that we designed Partiful were to reflect how planning actually happens and make the communication of that incredibly frictionless. So it all starts with creating an event page, which is exactly what it sounds like. A simple page that you can access via a URL through any browser or through our app, which has all of the information about the event. And important for us, it doesn't just have all the information like date, time, location. It actually expresses the vibe of the party. So is this, you know, a chill board game night? Is this a 40-person rager? Is this a 100-person rave? Is this a 2-person date night? Yes, we do have date nights that are planned on Partiful. And so each of those events I just mentioned has a different experience that's going to be offered and a different vibe you want to communicate. So for us, it's really important that you can design your page to give off that vibe. If you're having a rave, you might want to have lasers flying around your page. You can put lasers on your Partiful event. So now we have all the information centralized in one place. The vibe is really clear. Now let's talk about finding a time, sending out RSVPs. One thing that's really nice about Partiful is if you don't know what date works for a group of people to meet up, you can actually just send out a poll to everyone in your group. You can share the link via text message, social media, email, whatever channel you want. It's just a link. People respond at that link, and they either, if you know the date, they'll just say, you know, I'm going, or maybe, or I can't go. If it's a listed event, they might, you know, submit themselves to get on the list and you can manually approve them. Or if you're finding a time, they'll actually RSVP to different dates and times that work for them. And then you can see what are the most popular dates and times that work, and you can pick the one that you want. You can choose the most popular one, or you can choose the one that you were secretly rooting for. And then once you've picked a time, everyone's RSVPs are automatically reflected on the page. So everyone who said they could make that time is in. Everyone who said they couldn't make it will be RSVP'd as can't go, but they can change it if they want. So what's really nice about this is it takes what was previously a process that might take hours or days or even weeks and collapses it into something that takes each party a couple minutes.
Early on, one of the audiences that really gravitated to Partiful was Gen Z. What do you think really resonated with them, and, you know, how was it different than like old event apps, you know, for that group?
I think one thing that's interesting to me is there were all these products that were very focused on sending online invitations. Many of them were created 15 or 20 years ago. And there were a couple things that were unique about them. One was that they were very focused on taking physical experiences like sending an invitation in the mail, a paper invitation, and translating that to a digital experience. And then they were also utilizing the primary communication method of the time, which at that time was email. And then a few things happened which kind of meant that I think younger generations were forgotten about a little bit. We shifted away from using email, we switched over to social media and text, and then our aesthetics changed as they changed with every generation. There was certainly still a place for these very fancy and elegant events, and we're actually building more and more into Partiful so that if you want to have that type of event, you don't have to leave Partiful to do that. But there wasn't really a design language and aesthetic that captured the vibe of like, I'm just having a house party. It's not that deep. There's no bartender serving cocktails, but it's just, I've got some bottles of stuff and some solo cups, and I just want everyone to come over and we're gonna play some music and hang out. And that type of gathering still has a lot of the same problems I mentioned earlier around coordinating with a group of people, you know, finding a time, figuring out if you need people to bring stuff. But it doesn't have the same vibe of like your fancy cocktail party or like a kid's birthday party or something like that. So we just had this gap where our communication channels changed, and we were having all of these events that were in many cases very low key or just chiller or more ragey. And we didn't have products that reflected those. And for a while, people were using social media platforms to do that, but then a bunch of people migrated off of different social media platforms or found it really hard to try to do this on a social media platform like Instagram. And so it just created this vacuum. And we were the ones on the Partiful team feeling all these pain points ourselves. And so it was pretty intuitive for us to figure out what was missing and what we needed to fill that void.
And what do you think about sort of Gen Alpha coming after them, or even, you know, millennials, a very large group that you're starting to capture as well?
My hot take is that unlike the discourse, I don't think there's as much of a difference between millennials and Gen Z as the media wants us to think. I think there's the people who just feel underserved by a lot of legacy platforms, and then the people who are well served by legacy platforms. And I think that's actually the way more important distinction, and might transcend many different age groups, actually. What's interesting with younger generations is that they don't have as much of a concept of what life was like before the internet. And so a lot of the skeuomorphic design patterns, like showing, you know, a card animating out of an envelope, like I think someone born, you know, 10 years ago might be like, what even is that? What's a card? What's an envelope? The same way no one knows like what the save icon is. It was actually a floppy disk. And so more and more, I think some of these skeuomorphic patterns, they might be used in a very on the nose, like retro way, or ironically, but they're not going to be as needed to explain what a concept is. You don't need to explain an invite by showing, you know, a digital version of an envelope and a paper coming out of an envelope. I think something like Partiful is actually just much more intuitive. Apps become the default language and our default way of understanding the world. And so I think that that leads to a lot better of just like an intuition of how to use newer tools. And I think it makes something like Partiful feel a lot more natural because it reflects that digitally native experience that I think a lot of people grew up with, or in some cases now might have even been born with.
So starting any company is full of challenges. I think, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges you face, just either from a business or a product perspective for Partiful?
I think there are a lot of people who doubt us and underestimate us.
Your social media is full of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you know, I get it, right? It's a space where there historically haven't been a ton of big players other than, you know, the elephant in the room, the Big Blue app, which had a very famous and very successful events product. But since so much of Partiful's functionality is similar to these companies that, you know, maybe never hit like a venture scale, and it's easy to draw product parallels, I think it's easy to think of Partiful as something that might have a similar outcome. But the reality of what we're building under the hood is just so different that we see the world in a very different way. We're also pre-revenue, and a lot of people are like, well, how's Partiful going to make money? And we are very excited to talk more about that when the time is right. But I think when you think about these factors of the space that Partiful is in, the fact that partying, I remember this even from raising our first round of funding, partying was sort of dismissed as something very childish or something not important or something very like female coded and therefore less worthy of being taken seriously as, I don't know, some hardware or B2B SaaS startup. No shade to them. We need them. But there's just always people who are gonna underestimate what we're doing for any number of those reasons. And so the silver lining there is we brought a group of people together, the people on the Partiful team, the people who are part of our Partiful family, like Initialized, who we feel are in on this little secret. about how what we're doing actually is really important and is really impactful. We see every day the way it changes people's lives. There are people who have gotten married because they met at a Partiful party. There are people who have gotten married using Partiful to plan their wedding. And so when we see the kind of impact that we know we're having and we think about what we have still left to build, we are very excited, and haters gonna hate.
So as a product and design person, I have to ask you about the new logo. You know, what inspired it and what was some of the thought process behind that?
So when you take a team of like 20 of the most opinionated and design sensitive people in the world, and you have them do something like pick a new logo, it takes forever. It's something that we had been wanting to do for over a year, but it took us a really long time to land on something that felt right. The reason we wanted to change the logo was, one, just from a functional perspective, it actually like wasn't that good of a logo. Like it's hard to read from a distance. The old text was very thin, meaning that if you put it on a poster from a distance, like you would have no idea what it said. So even for that reason alone, it was worth changing. And we had some really interesting constraints. We didn't want to pick specific brand colors. If you've seen our app, you'll know that every single page on Partiful looks different. We had this challenge of how do you create a new identity without using a set of brand colors, and what other design languages can we use to reflect what we're trying to do? And so some of the requirements were, it's got to be bold enough that you can read it when you put it on a poster. No sparkles. And it has to embody partying and the people who party and the people who socialize and gather. It has to embody the fun of that, the fluidity of that, and also not, and frankly, capture the range of what social gathering means. Like we can't really just have something that's too disco focused, because dancing is great, but that's not the only way you party. We can't have something that's too alcohol focused, because not everybody drinks. And so how do you encompass the concept of gathering? Like that's so abstract. Like, why can't we just do like a Nike swoosh because we're named after the Greek? No, it doesn't work. So that's why it ended up taking us a really long time. But what we landed in is something that is very fluid. We had a really cool photo campaign when we launched the logo, where we had the Partiful logo rendered as a piece of ice in a glass, or as grass on a field. And so there was just that flexibility, and grounding that in the real world was something we were really able to get to with the new logo. And I hope it lasts us a long time, because users hate change, and I never want to have to get 20 opinionated people on board with one design ever again.
Well, your team's going to grow, and you're going to end up having like even more people and even more change.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. What are some of the craziest party themes you've seen on Partiful?
There are several. So we are seeing a lot of kind of niche party themes, a lot based on like current memes or trends. And so right now there's a lot of brat parties for Charli XCX's new album. We've seen some cool like Lana Del Rey Americana parties. Some people will do parties just for like silly activities, like a water tasting party, which I've talked about before. You like, try different brands of sparkling water. I saw a sandwich party once where every single person had to bring one ingredient to make a sandwich. And then the game was just like combine all of the ingredients into a sandwich that you could eat, or as many as you can. Like the person with the most ingredients wins.
And broadly, like what are some trends that you're seeing in events or partying?
One thing that's more Partiful specific, but has kind of become a meme, is people creating Partifles for everything. Like creating a Partiful to ask your boyfriend if you guys can have spaghetti on Thursday night for dinner. Or creating a Partiful to go on a walk in the park with your best friend. We recently launched the ability to sync your Google or Apple Calendar to Partiful, so all of your Partiful events automatically appear on your calendar. And so with that, it made it way easier to just create Partifles for everything, because it's actually faster than creating a calendar invite. You can just do one tap, invite someone, and you're done, especially on the app. And so why not just like if you're trying to put something on your calendar, create a Partiful for it because it's fun and memey and cute, and you can be silly about it.
I guess you mentioned earlier that a lot of people have, use Partiful to meet people romantically, but just even for friends, I guess, how do people use Partiful to meet, make new friends and find people they didn't know before?
Yeah. So you might have had this experience of going to a party and having a great conversation with someone, but maybe you get pulled away, you forget their name, you don't exchange contact information, or maybe you think about exchanging contact information, but it's like a little weird. It's fine to do it if it's like a professional context, or we even have language around that if you're trying to like date someone. But I don't know about you, but I find it really intimidating to like ask someone out on like a friend date. How do you even do that? And so a big part of how we built Partiful was to help solve the missed connections problem. And we do this in a few ways. So one, on Partiful, even if you're just RSVPing to an event, you have a little profile. And it's not supposed to be like super extra. It's not supposed to replace your Instagram profile or anything, but just add a photo, include your name, maybe throw in your socials if you want people to find you. And now everyone else at that event knows who you are. And so what that means is anyone else can go back to that event after the party and be like, oh, who was that person I was talking to? Oh, it's this person. And then now you have a way of connecting with them. Maybe you can DM them on Instagram. We have a feature right now where you can boop them, which is kind of like poking, but it's booping, but it's basically the same thing.
Booping's more fun.
Yeah, boopings are fun. You can send them like a little emoji to say hi. And you can also now invite that person to something that you're hosting or something that you're attending. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm inviting a bunch of people from Jen's party to my thing next weekend. You're invited, would love to see you there. And you might not even be ready to turn that into a one-on-one relationship. Maybe it's just like, yeah, they were cool, they would be great to see again, but you're able to do that in a group context. And so I think that's what's really special about Partiful is people can do the thing that feels the least intimidating to do in real life, which is just be like, oh yeah, a bunch of the cool people from that party are invited to the next thing. And we make it really easy to do that within the product, whereas before you might not even have a way of getting in touch with that person.
What are some of your tips to host a great party?
One of my favorite questions. So I think one of the misconceptions that people have about hosting is that if you're the host, you have to do all the work. And the secret is that as the host, you actually have the power to make everyone else do quite a lot of work. If you need help during the party, like put your friends to work, have someone making drinks. When people are leaving, have them take down a bag of trash or recycling with them. And people are actually very happy to contribute because one, they're so grateful that you're hosting. And they're so grateful to get this experience of a social gathering with their friends. Another thing I like to do is batch cocktails. So just make a big batch of something or have one signature cocktail. Today we're gonna do a little garden party happy hour, and people aren't gonna be asking for a specific drink like, oh, where's my Manhattan or where's my Paloma? People are just gonna be happy that there's a drink. So we have a basil gimlet, and I think a mocktail version of that, which can use basically the same mix. So that's actually really easy. You just make one mix, you add alcohol to one batch, no alcohol in the other batch, and you're done. And then as long as you have some type of a theme in mind, and if you need ideas, you can always DM the Partiful team and we'd be happy to help. Something like what we're doing at this little garden party happy hour is, I think, a great example of how you can have a theme and have it be simple and beautiful and actually not that much work and really fun for everyone.
Looking towards the future, what's exciting to you, and what do you think Partiful is going to be in, even 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah. What we're building towards is being able to power everything you do in the real world with your friends. So that means all of your social plans, we want to make all of them easier and more fun and more joyful. So we want to help you find fun things to do with your friends, even if that's not a party, but something that you're all going to together. We want to make it easier to plan both larger events and smaller events. We want to help you figure out your social calendar and find people to go to different things with, and help you plan trips that you're taking with your friends. So really everything that makes your social life meaningful, we want Partiful to be making that easier and more joyful for you.
And really fulfilling the original intent when we had that very first pitch of curing loneliness.
There you go. It's the North Star.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Shreya, for joining us today. It was great to have you.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here.